My son's fiancée shouted, "Security, remove him. This stinky country boy is polluting my air." The plaza ballroom fell silent. 300 elegant guests turned to stare as I stood in the doorway wearing a 20-year-old suit and boots, still dusted with Kentucky clay. I searched for my son, expecting him to defend me. Instead, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "Leave! You're embarrassing me." In my pocket was a cashier's check for $5 million, the wedding gift I had spent a lifetime earning. I said nothing. I simply walked outside and dropped it into the nearest trash can. In that moment, everything inside me changed forever. Thank you for being here and sharing this moment with me. Before the story continues, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them all. A quick note. Some details in this story are fictionalized for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but the lesson behind it is meaningful. My name is Peter Barrington, though most people simply call me Gus. I'm 72 years old, and for the past decade, I've allowed the world to believe I'm nothing more than a quiet widower who enjoys growing corn and keeping to himself. Letting people think that keeps life peaceful. It keeps the sharks away. But standing alone on the cold sidewalk outside the plaza that night, shivering in the New York wind, I realized something painful. Playing the harmless fool had cost me something I could never buy back my son. Nicholas had no idea that the smell of fertilizer he mocked was actually the scent of wealth. He never understood that Barrington Agritech, the company I built with these rough, calloused hands, wasn't just a family farm. It had grown into an $800 million global enterprise. Our patented drought-resistant seed strains fed farmers across half the Midwest. But Nicholas didn't see any of that. All he saw was dirt on a pair of old boots. He never saw the power behind it. I pulled out my phone and dialed my assistant, Martha. It was late, but she answered immediately as she always did. "Martha, cancel check number 409 right now." There was a pause. "But, Mr. Barrington, that's the wedding gift. Cancel it," I repeated calmly. "And call Catherine Ollie. Tell her I want a full forensic background investigation on the Hawthorne family. I want everything. Debts, lawsuits, tax filings, even unpaid parking tickets. If they sneezed in 1995, I want to know who handed them the tissue." That night, I checked into a cheap Motel 6 in Queens. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but it felt more honest than the glittering luxury back at the plaza. I couldn't stand being anywhere near the world that had poisoned my son's judgment. At exactly 7 the next morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Nicholas. His voice dripped with fake sweetness the moment I answered. "Dad, I'm so sorry about last night. Amelia just had too much champagne. The wedding planning has been stressful. You know how brides get. We love you so much." I said nothing. "So, you're still coming to the office Monday to sign the trust fund transfer paper, right?" I stared at the yellow water stain spreading across the motel ceiling. It suddenly became very clear that he wasn't apologizing. He was terrified he might have offended the golden goose before collecting the final egg. I forced my voice to sound weak and tired. "I understand, son. My memory isn't what it used to be. I probably shouldn't have come unannounced. I'll be there Monday." We hung up. A minute later, an email notification appeared on my phone. It was from Catherine Ollie, my lawyer. The subject line contained just 2 words: the fraud. I opened the file and began reading. The Hawthorne family weren't Texas oil magnates as they claimed. They were professional grifters. Richard Hawthorne had filed for bankruptcy 3 years earlier and owed the IRS nearly $15 million in unpaid taxes. They were drowning financially, and my son had become their life raft. But the next document hurt far more. It was a transaction log from a subsidiary company I had placed under Nicholas's management so he could learn the business. Over the past month, he had quietly siphoned $3 million from corporate accounts. $3 million. He wasn't just marrying into a fraudulent family. He was stealing from me to impress them. Monday morning arrived gray and damp. Instead of dressing like a CEO, I pulled on my old gardening overalls and a faded cap. I rubbed a little potting soil across my hands. If they wanted to see a dirty old farmer, that's exactly what they would get until the trap snapped shut. When I walked into Nicholas's sleek Manhattan office, the receptionist wrinkled her nose before even speaking. Inside the conference room, Nicholas and Amelia sat at a glass table that probably cost more than my first tractor. Amelia didn't bother looking at me. She simply tapped her manicured nails impatiently while checking her watch. Dad, Nicholas said, with a thin smile, sliding a thick stack of papers toward me. "Great. You're here. Just sign here, here, and here. It's just routine insurance updates we talked about." I glanced down at the documents. They weren't insurance papers. They were an irrevocable transfer of power, granting him full voting control over my shares. He wasn't asking for help. He was trying to steal the entire company. My hands trembled not with age, but with controlled fury. I picked up the expensive fountain pen he had offered. "Oh, clumsy me," I muttered as I deliberately let the pen slip from my fingers. It rolled across the polished table and disappeared underneath. "Let me get that." I groaned slowly, bending down toward the floor, moving like an old man whose back had seen too many years. While I was bent under the table, completely hidden from their sight, my hand moved quickly. From the pocket of my overalls, I pulled out a small black listening device and pressed it firmly against the underside of the polished wood. It was military-grade equipment, something my head of security had insisted I carry after years of dealing with corporate predators. The device was no larger than a coin, but it could record every whisper in the room. Once it was secured, I picked up the fallen pen and slowly climbed back into my chair, groaning like an old man whose back had seen too many winters. Nicholas and Amelia barely glanced at me. Their impatience hung in the air. I signed the documents, but I did not sign my full legal name. Instead of writing Peter Barrington, I signed August Barrington, quietly leaving out the U and the S. A tiny difference, almost invisible, but legally, it meant every single document in that stack was worthless. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I need to head home, son," I said, coughing lightly. "The city air hurts my lungs." "Good. Go get some rest, Dad," Nicholas replied without looking up. He grabbed the papers quickly, too eager to check the signatures. To him, the victory was already complete. I left the building, walked calmly to my beat-up Ford truck, parked around the corner, and climbed inside. The outside might have looked like an old farm vehicle, but the inside was equipped with technology that could rival a surveillance van. I slipped on my headset and turned on the receiver. The audio from the conference room came through instantly clear, as if I were still sitting there. "Is he gone?" Amelia's voice asked. "Yes," Nicholas replied. "God, that smell still lingers." "Open a window." Then came Nicholas's voice, again trembling with excitement. He signed it. "We have control. 80% of the voting stock. Barrington Agritech is ours." Amelia laughed a sharp, satisfied sound. "Perfect. Now we can move forward with the real plan. Dr. Evans already prepared the medical file. Once the wedding is over, we declare him mentally incompetent. Alzheimer's. We send him to that state facility in Nebraska, the cheap one. He won't last 6 months. My grip tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They weren't just trying to steal my company. They were planning to lock me away and wait for me to die. Then another voice entered the conversation. Richard, Amelia's father. "Are you sure the old mule won't fight back?" he asked. "He won't," Nicholas replied dismissively. "He's weak, just a lonely old farmer." Richard's voice dropped lower, but the microphone captured every word. "Just in case." I had my mechanic take a look at his truck while it was parked outside. He loosened the brake line a little. "If he hits highway speeds on the way back to Kentucky, nature will take its course." He chuckled quietly. "An unfortunate accident." My blood ran cold. I glanced down at the dashboard. I was already merging onto the highway. The speedometer climbed past 50 miles per hour. I pressed the brake pedal. It sank straight to the floor. No resistance. Nothing. I was now flying down the highway at 60 miles per hour inside 3 tons of steel with no brakes. A surge of panic shot through my chest like fire. Ahead of me, a sea of red brake lights filled the road. I pumped the pedal again. Nothing. They hadn't just plotted to ruin me. They had planned to kill me. "Think Gus," I muttered under my breath. I grabbed the emergency brake handle. If I yanked it too hard at this speed, the truck would spin and flip. But if I didn't act, I would plow straight into the minivan in front of me. I downshifted hard. The transmission screamed in protest as the engine roared. The truck jolted, slowing slightly. Carefully, I pulled the emergency brake upward inch by inch. The rear tires locked and began to skid. The truck fishtailed violently across the lane. Horns erupted all around me. Drivers swerved. I fought the steering wheel, forcing the truck toward the gravel shoulder. Dust exploded beneath the tires as I pulled the brake harder. The wheels screamed against the pavement. The truck shuddered violently, shaking like a wounded animal. Then finally, just inches from the concrete barrier, the vehicle lurched to a stop. For several seconds, I didn't move. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, listening to the ticking of the engine as it cooled. They thought I would die on that highway. Instead, they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. I sat there for a long time after the truck finally stopped gripping the steering wheel and listening to the soft ticking of the cooling engine. Cars rushed past on the highway beside me, their tires humming against the asphalt as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside my chest, my heart was pounding so violently, it felt like a trapped bird trying to escape my ribs. I slowly lifted my hands and looked at them. They were steady. The fear that had flooded my body moments earlier was gone. It had burned away completely, leaving behind something colder and far more dangerous. The trembling old man they believed me to be no longer existed. What remained was harder than steel. They wanted a senile old farmer. They wanted a helpless victim. I leaned forward and opened the glove compartment. Inside was a small burner phone, something I kept for emergencies that required absolute discretion. I switched it on and dialed a number from memory. Kat answered on the second ring. "Gus, are you all right? Activate clause 14. B," I said quietly. There was a sharp pause on the other end of the line. "Gus." "That's the nuclear option," she replied carefully. "It freezes all corporate assets. It locks the entire company down. The board will panic." "Do it," I said flatly. "And call the bank. I want to buy Richard Hawthorne's debt. All of it, every single dollar." Another pause. "I want to own the roof over that man's head by tomorrow morning." "Gus." "What happened?" I looked out through the windshield at the endless line of cars rushing down the highway. "They tried to kill me, Kat," I said quietly. There was silence. "My son just tried to kill me." I hung up before she could respond. For a moment, I stared into the rearview mirror. The face looking back at me was not the confused old farmer Nicholas thought he knew. The man in the mirror had survived droughts that wiped out entire harvests. He had fought off corporate raiders who tried to buy his land for pennies. He had clawed his way through floods lawsuits and financial predators. Nicholas thought I smelled like fertilizer. He was about to discover that he was right, because fertilizer is what you use when you plan to bury something. And I was about to bury them all. I stepped out of the truck and began walking along the shoulder of the highway, the wind whipping against my jacket. I had a wedding to prepare for, and I needed a new suit. The morning sun reached the porch of my farmhouse at exactly 7 o'clock. I was already sitting in my old rocking chair, holding a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The air carried the clean smell of damp soil and soybean fields. It was the only scent that had ever truly made sense to me. I hadn't slept for a single minute. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene at the plaza replayed in my mind like a broken film reel, Amelia's voice. The laughter, Nicholas's whisper, telling me to leave. Then my phone buzzed on the small wooden table beside me. The screen lit up with Nicholas's name. I stared at it for a long moment. Just yesterday, seeing his name would have made me smile. Now it twisted something deep inside my stomach. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I had a role to play. "Hello, son?" I said softly, forcing my voice to sound thin and tired. "Dad, thank God you answered." His voice spilled through the speaker, coated in artificial warmth, like syrup poured over a razor blade. "I've been so worried about you. Look, about last night. I'm so incredibly sorry." I didn't respond. I simply listened. "It was Amelia," he continued, quickly filling the silence. "She had too much champagne on an empty stomach. You know how she gets when she's stressed. The wedding planning has been a nightmare for her. Still, I said nothing. She didn't mean any of that. Dad," he went on, "she loves you. We both do." I stared out at the cornfields stretching toward the horizon. "She loves me," I repeated slowly. "She called security on me." I know, Nicholas said quickly. "And she feels terrible about it this morning." The lie rolled off his tongue with frightening ease. I could almost picture him rehearsing the speech in a mirror. "She just didn't recognize you in the lighting," he added weakly. "It was a misunderstanding. Please, Dad, don't let one bad night ruin everything we've built. We're family. Family." The word tasted like ashes. I rubbed my eyes with my free hand. "So what happens now, son?" "Well," his voice shifted slightly, the false apology fading into urgency. "That's actually why I'm calling so early." Of course it was. "We really need to get those trust fund transfer papers signed. The lawyers are pushing hard for it. If we don't have your signature by Monday afternoon, it could delay the merger with the Hawthorne family." He paused. "And you know, we don't want to keep billionaires waiting, right?" I closed my eyes slowly. There it was, the real reason for the call. He didn't care about the humiliation. He didn't care about the insults, the lies, or the damage done. All he cared about was the signature, the key to the vault, the golden goose. My son wasn't apologizing. He was making sure the door to my fortune was still open. He wanted the keys to the kingdom. That much was obvious. I took a slow breath and allowed my shoulders to sag, slipping back into the role he believed so easily. The tired, confused old man who no longer understood the modern world. I let my voice soften, adding a slight tremble. I don't know, Nicholas, I muttered. My head is still spinning from the trip. I'm just an old farmer. Maybe I should stay out of your big city business. The reaction on the other end of the line was immediate. No, Dad. No, don't say that. Panic slipped into his voice before he could hide it. You're the heart of this family. We need you. Just come to the office Monday morning. I'll have a car pick you up. You only need to sign a few papers, that's all. Then you can go back to the farm and relax. We'll take care of everything. He paused, then added gently, We'll take care of you. I didn't answer right away. I let silence stretch between us, long enough for his nerves to begin tightening. Finally, I sighed softly. All right, son, I said. I suppose you know best. I'll be there Monday. Relief flooded his voice instantly. You're the best dad. Seriously, I love you. See you Monday. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and placed it carefully on the wooden table beside me. My hand didn't tremble. The sadness that had weighed on me the night before had vanished completely. In its place was something colder, something sharper. Nicholas believed he had manipulated a confused old man. What he didn't realize was that he had just walked straight into a lion's den. I picked up the phone again and dialed another number. Catherine Alley answered before the second ring could finish. She was the only person in the world who truly understood who I was and what I was capable of. Good morning, Gus, she said calmly. Let me guess. The prodigal son finally called? He did, I replied, stepping off the porch and walking slowly across the wooden boards. He's desperate, Cat. He wants that signature Monday like his life depends on it. It probably does, she said evenly. I stopped near the porch railing and looked out over the fields. I need you to dig, I told her. Everything you can find on the Hawthorne family. Nicholas treats them like royalty. He's terrified of upsetting them. I want to know why. What exactly are you looking for? Everything I said. Where their money comes from, who they owe. Every lawsuit, every lien, every financial skeleton they've buried. Hell, I want to know what color toothbrush Richard Hawthorne uses. Kat gave a small, humorless chuckle. I'm already on it, Gus. Give me 3 hours. The call ended. For the next 3 hours, I paced the wooden floor inside my farmhouse like a restless animal. I didn't go out to the fields. I didn't check the tractors or the irrigation lines. I couldn't focus on anything except the questions circling my mind. Why would my son, who had been handed every opportunity in life, be so desperate to merge with these people? Why would he humiliate his own father just to impress them? Something didn't add up. At exactly 10:30, my secure email chimed. The report had arrived. I sat down behind the heavy oak desk that had belonged to my father before me and opened the file. The first page contained a short summary. The very first sentence made me laugh out loud. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was bitter and hollow, echoing through the empty farmhouse. The Hawthorne family are not oil tycoons. They are frauds. I leaned forward and began scrolling through the report, devouring every line. Richard Hawthorne had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Texas 3 years earlier. The so-called oil empire he bragged about was nothing more than a collection of dry wells, failed drilling projects, and reckless investments. They didn't own the luxury penthouse they lived in. They rented it month to month. Their exotic cars weren't purchased. They were leased. Every part of their lavish lifestyle was borrowed. Every bit of it sat on top of a mountain of debt. According to Kat's research, the Hawthorne family owed the IRS nearly $15 million in back taxes, penalties, and accumulated interest. Creditors in 3 different states were pursuing lawsuits against them. They weren't billionaires. They were drowning. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Now the pieces finally started fitting together. The rushed wedding, the pressure to merge companies, the desperate need for my signature. They didn't want a partnership. They wanted a bailout. They were looking for someone foolish enough to rescue them from financial ruin and fund the luxury life they pretended to deserve. And they had found the perfect target, my son. But the discovery raised a darker question. Nicholas wasn't stupid. He held an MBA from Harvard. He could read financial statements better than most executives in Manhattan. How could he not see that the Hawthorne family was bankrupt unless he did see it, unless he was part of the scheme? Or worse, unless he was already so deep in trouble that he had no choice but to join them. I closed the Hawthorne report and opened a new browser window. Within seconds, I logged into the secure server of Barrington Agritech. Instead of checking the main corporate dashboard, I navigated directly to the subsidiary companies. Years earlier, I had created a small logistics company under the larger corporate umbrella and placed Nicholas in charge of it. It was meant to be his training ground, a sandbox where he could learn to manage real cash flow vendor contracts and operations without risking the primary business. I reviewed the reports every quarter. At least I used to. Lately I had been less attentive. I trusted him. Now I opened the transaction logs for the past 6 months. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Operating expenses, payroll, vendor payments, fuel contracts, routine logistics costs. But then one entry caught my attention. A transfer of $500,000 to a consulting firm in Delaware. 2 days later, there was another transfer. $700,000 to a holding company in Nevada. I frowned and opened the details. The consulting firm had no website, no corporate profile. Its registered address was nothing more than a P.O. box. I searched for the holding company, another dead end. I kept scrolling. The transfers grew larger, more frequent. $1 million the previous month. Another $2 million just a week earlier. By the time I finished reviewing the records, a cold weight had settled in my chest. Over the past 30 days alone, $3 million had quietly vanished from company accounts, drained away without explanation, and every single transfer had been authorized by one person. My son. My heart pounded violently against my ribs as I stared at the numbers glowing on the screen. This wasn't sloppy accounting or careless management. It was something far worse. It was embezzlement. My son was stealing from me. I leaned closer to the monitor and began tracing the routing numbers, following the digital trail one transfer at a time. Years ago, I had learned how to do this while defending my company against corporate raiders in the 90s. Back then, men in expensive suits had tried to dismantle everything I had built. I learned quickly that the only way to survive was to understand money better than the predators hunting it. The same instincts guided my fingers now. For nearly 20 minutes, I dug through transaction records, hidden accounts, and intermediary transfers designed to obscure the flow of funds. The trail twisted through shell companies and consulting firms that barely existed outside a piece of paper. But eventually, every trail ends somewhere, and this one ended offshore. The final destination was a private account in the Cayman Islands. My stomach tightened as I opened the beneficiary details. The account holder was not Nicholas Barrington. It was Richard Hawthorne. The breath left my lungs. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But the truth didn't change. $3 million. That was how much had vanished in the last 30 days alone. $3 million siphoned from my company. $3 million wired directly into the pocket of a professional con artist. I felt like someone had driven a fist straight through my ribs. Slowly, I slumped forward, resting my forehead against the cool oak surface of my desk. My son wasn't just being manipulated by these people, he was financing them. Every dollar had been earned through decades of work, through drought seasons when crops failed, through sleepless nights balancing loans, through years spent fighting corporations that wanted my land. That money came from soil under my fingernails and sweat on my back, and Nicholas was handing it over to a fraud. He was paying for a lifestyle he couldn't afford. He was buying his way into their counterfeit aristocracy. He was paying them to let him marry their daughter. The betrayal was so complete, it left me dizzy. Just days earlier, he had looked me in the eye, called me a stinking country boy, and thrown me out of his celebration, all while his pockets were full of stolen money from my accounts. He wasn't just a disappointing son. He was a criminal. I straightened slowly in my chair. The grief I had felt before was gone. In its place rose something far colder and far more focused, a calculating fury. My eyes returned to the glowing screen, to the neat rows of evidence documenting my son's treachery. They wanted to play games with money. Fine, I invented this game. I picked up my phone and dialed Kat again. She answered immediately. "Did you read the report, Gus?" she asked. "I did," I said calmly. "But I found something else. What do you mean Nicholas transferred $3 million from company accounts to Richard Hawthorne in the last month?" The sharp sound of Kat inhaling filled the line. "Gus, that's a felony," she said. "If we report this to federal authorities." "Not yet," I interrupted. Silence. "If we report it now," I continued, "the Hawthorne family disappears. They'll take the money and vanish. Nicholas will be left standing alone with the charges, and you don't want that. No." I leaned back in my chair. "I want all of them." I let the words hang there. "I want every single rat caught in the trap." Kat was quiet for several seconds. Finally, she spoke again. "What's your plan?" "I'm going to New York on Monday," I said. "I'll walk into that office and play the senile old fool they believe I am. And then I'll give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. But Gus, $3 million, the price of admission." I replied evenly. "I want to see how far they're willing to go." I paused, imagining the moment already. "I want to see their faces when the trap snaps shut. The call ended a moment later. I set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking my fields. The corn stretched high and green across the land, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. It was honest work out there, pure work, unlike the rot spreading through my own family. I turned away and crossed the room to the wall, safe hidden behind a framed painting of my late wife. Her smile in that portrait always steadied me. I spun the combination dial and opened the heavy steel door. Inside were stacks of cash property deeds and old contracts. But I reached past all of that. My hand closed around a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside lay a tiny listening device, military grade, nearly impossible to detect. I slipped it into my pocket. Nicholas wanted a signature. He wanted a merger. He wanted to become a powerful man in a powerful family. On Monday, I was going to give him a performance he would never forget. And I would record every second of it. The stinky country boy was coming to town. And he was bringing the storm with him. Monday morning arrived under a gray drizzle that hung over Manhattan like a warning. The rain matched the storm brewing inside me. I pulled my battered Ford F-150 to the curb, directly in front of the gleaming glass tower that housed the satellite office of Barrington Agritech. The building rose into the clouds like a monument to money. My truck looked completely out of place. The valet approached cautiously and immediately wrinkled his nose when he saw the mud splashed across the wheel wells and the dent in the rear bumper. To him, the truck probably looked like a contagious disease. I tossed him the keys along with a $20 bill. "Keep her running, son," I said, leaning slightly on the door. "My girl gets cranky when she gets cold." He nodded awkwardly. I stepped onto the sidewalk and walked through the revolving doors. The polished marble lobby smelled faintly of expensive cologne and floor wax. I had dressed carefully for the role. My favorite pair of denim overalls hung loose on my frame, the left thigh permanently stained with old tractor grease. My flannel shirt had survived at least 2 decades of hard work. I had even rubbed a little potting soil under my fingernails. For good measure, I had rubbed raw onion on my hands to add the proper scent. The security guard hesitated when I approached. He looked me up and down, clearly uncertain whether I belonged inside a building like this. Then recognition flickered across his face. He had seen my photo in the company newsletter, even if he clearly wished he hadn't. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. I entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The ride up was quiet. When the doors opened, conversation across the office floor stopped instantly. Young analysts in tailored suits worth thousands of dollars froze mid-sentence as they stared at me. The silence spread through the room like a ripple in still water. I could feel their eyes following every step. The receptionist sat behind a sleek white desk, looking like she had been carved from marble and dressed in a designer suit that cost more than my first tractor. As I approached, her nose wrinkled ever so slightly. "Mr. Barrington," she said stiffly. "Your son is expecting you." She hesitated before adding, "He mentioned you might be dressed casually." I gave her a slow nod and shuffled past her desk. I made sure to drag my feet slightly, my boots thumping loudly against the polished marble floor. Each heavy step echoed through the quiet office, exactly the way I wanted it to. I pushed open the heavy double doors to the main conference room. Nicholas and Amelia were already waiting. They sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, a table I had personally selected 10 years earlier from a sustainable forest in Brazil. Back then, I had believed the company would one day belong to my son. I had imagined him sitting at that very seat as a leader, not a thief. Amelia looked up the moment I entered. Her expression twisted instantly. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a silk handkerchief, pressing it tightly over her nose and mouth, as if I had brought disease into the room. "Oh God, Nicholas," she said through the fabric, her voice dripping with disgust. "He actually smells like manure. Did he come straight from the pig pen?" Before Nicholas could answer, she produced a bottle of Chanel perfume and sprayed a thick cloud of fragrance into the air between us. The scent was sharp and expensive, and completely unnecessary. Nicholas stood from his chair, forcing a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Dad," he said, "you made it. Come on in. Have a seat." He didn't offer a handshake. He simply gestured toward a chair at the far end of the table, deliberately as far away from them as possible. I shuffled forward and lowered myself into the seat heavily, letting my joints crack loudly as I settled in. "So, son," I said, slowly adjusting the reading glasses I had deliberately taped together at the bridge. I made my voice quiver slightly. "What is all this about again?" "My memory isn't what it used to be, and these city lights give me a headache." Nicholas slid a thick stack of documents across the polished surface of the table. "It's just routine paperwork, Dad," he said casually. "Insurance updates, liability waivers for the farm equipment, The usual boring legal stuff. We just need to modernize the files before the merger. He tapped several bright yellow tabs sticking out from the pages. Just sign wherever you see the stickers. I looked down at the documents. I didn't need to read the fine print. I had written the original bylaws of this company myself. I knew exactly what these papers were. This wasn't insurance paperwork. It was an irrevocable durable power of attorney, transferring full voting authority of Barrington Agritech to Nicholas immediately. A corporate coup, a clean, bloodless execution of my authority. My hands began to tremble. This time, I didn't need to pretend. The betrayal sat inside my chest like a physical weight. Here, Nicholas said impatiently, sliding a Mont Blanc fountain pen toward me. Use this. I took the pen, allowing my fingers to shake violently. I leaned forward over the papers, squinting as though I couldn't read the text clearly. Then I held the pen above the signature line, and I let it slip. The pen clattered loudly against the table and rolled off the edge, disappearing onto the carpet. Oh, clumsy me, I muttered weakly. Butterfingers. I sighed and shook my head. Let me get that. I bent down slowly, groaning, as I lowered myself toward the floor. Above me, I heard Amelia sigh dramatically. Jesus Christ, she said under her breath. Can't you help him, Nicholas? This is pathetic. He's senile. While I was beneath the table, hidden from their sight, my movements changed instantly. My hand moved with the speed and precision of the soldier I had once been. From my overall pocket, I pulled out the listening device. It was a small black disc, no bigger than a quarter. I peeled away the adhesive backing and pressed it firmly against the underside of the table, right at the center. Perfect placement. From that position, it would capture every whisper spoken in this room. I picked up the fallen pen and slowly pulled myself back into the chair, breathing heavily, as if the effort had exhausted me. My apologies, I wheezed. My back isn't what it used to be. Just sign the papers. Dad Nicholas snapped his patience, clearly wearing thin. We have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin, and we're already running late. Insurance papers, right? I lifted the pen again. Before writing, I looked up at Nicholas one final time. I gave him one last opportunity. Is this everything, son? I asked quietly. Just insurance. Yes, Dad, he replied immediately. Just sign. So I did. I signed my name on every single line. But I did not sign Peter P. Barrington. Instead, I wrote August Barrington. I left off the U and S at the end of my first name. And I completely omitted my middle initial. The difference was small, barely noticeable to the casual eye. But legally, it changed everything. That was not my official signature. If those documents ever appeared in court, they would be thrown out instantly. Every page was legally worthless. There you go, I said, closing the folder gently. All done. Nicholas snatched the folder eagerly, his eyes gleaming with greed. He didn't even glance at the signatures. He was too arrogant, too confident in his victory. Thanks, Dad, he said quickly. You can go now. The car downstairs will take you back to the airport. I rose slowly from my chair. Goodbye, son, I said. Then I looked toward Amelia. Goodbye, Amelia. She didn't even bother looking up. Her attention was already locked on her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. No doubt she was texting her father, probably telling him the old fool had signed everything, that the Eagle had landed, and the money was finally theirs. I walked out of that office without looking back. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, the slump vanished from my shoulders. My back straightened, my steps grew firm again, and the tired old farmer they believed in disappeared. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, I was already moving with purpose. I marched across the polished floor past the stunned security guard, who had watched me shuffle in earlier, and pushed through the revolving doors into the gray Manhattan street. My truck was waiting at the curb. From the outside, it still looked like what it had always been. A battered farm truck with faded paint mud splattered along the wheel wells, and a dent in the rear bumper that had been there since a runaway tractor incident 15 years ago. But inside the cab was something entirely different. I climbed in, shut the door, and locked it. The interior was a mobile command center disguised beneath worn leather seats and cracked plastic panels. Hidden beneath the dashboard was a bank of surveillance equipment that rivaled anything used in corporate investigations. I flipped a switch. A small screen flickered to life. I slipped on a pair of heavy noise-canceling headphones and turned the volume knob slowly upward. For a second, the audio feed crackled with static. Then it stabilized, crystal clear. I could hear the rustle of documents. I could hear the faint clink of ice settling in a glass. The listening device I had planted under the conference table was working perfectly. I leaned back in the seat and stared through the rain-streaked windshield while I waited. I wanted to hear what they would say when they believed the old man was gone. I wanted to know just how deep the rot went. The taxi ride that night felt like a funeral procession, not for the wrecked truck left on the highway, for the man I used to be, the Peter Barrington who believed family meant loyalty, the man who believed forgiveness could fix anything. That man had died on the FDR Drive, crushed against a concrete barrier, while a brake pedal sank uselessly to the floor. The man sitting in the back of this yellow cab was someone else entirely. I was a businessman now, and I was about to close the most ruthless deal of my life. By the time the taxi dropped me near JFK Airport, the rain had stopped. The driver pulled up in front of a small, forgettable motel that didn't even bother advertising its name in bright lights. That was exactly what I needed. I couldn't go back to the plaza. I couldn't go anywhere Nicholas might think to look. For the next 48 hours, I needed to disappear. I needed them to wonder. I needed them to sweat. The room I rented smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and harsh lemon cleaner. The carpet was thin and worn, and the air conditioner rattled like a loose tractor engine. It was perfect. I peeled off my dirty overalls and stepped into the bathroom. The shower water came out nearly boiling, but I didn't turn it down. I stood under the spray scrubbing grease dirt and dried blood from my skin until it burned. When I finally stepped out, the mirror above the sink reflected a man I barely recognized. The cut on my forehead was shallow, but it would bruise nicely. Good. A visible reminder of their treachery. I wrapped a towel around my waist and sat on the edge of the bed, opening my laptop. It was time to begin. I called Kat. It was past midnight, but I knew she wouldn't be asleep. Status report, I said the moment she answered. It's done, Gus Kat replied. Her voice carried a tight edge of adrenaline. We triggered Clause 14B of the corporate bylaws. As chairman, you have the authority to freeze executive assets pending investigation into financial misconduct, and Nicholas's personal accounts are locked. His company credit cards are dead. As of tomorrow morning, he won't be able to buy a stick of gum. A grim smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Excellent. And the debt, I asked. That's taken care of too, she said. I spoke to the risk management officer at the bank holding Richard Hawthorne's portfolio. They were thrilled to unload $12 million in toxic debt. How much 60 cents on the dollar? I whistled softly. As of an hour ago, she continued, you are now the sole creditor of the Hawthorne estate. You own their mortgage, their vehicle leases, and every outstanding business loan. She paused. You essentially own them. A cold satisfaction settled in my chest. Does Richard know yet? Not yet, Kat said. The bank will send the official notice in the morning, but judging by his financial habits, he probably won't check his mail for days. He's too busy counting money he thinks he's getting from you. Let him sleep, I said. I want him dreaming sweet dreams before the nightmare begins. Sleep never came. Instead, I spent the night orchestrating the next phase of my plan. By dawn, I had arranged for a private jet to leave Kentucky, carrying my head of security and a team of forensic accountants. If I was going to dismantle these people, I needed professionals documenting every step. I wasn't just going to ruin them. I was going to dissect them. 3 days before the wedding, my phone lit up. Nicholas. I let it ring. Then it rang again and again. Eventually, the call went to voicemail. A message arrived seconds later. Dad, are you okay? I tried calling yesterday. The car service said they couldn't find you. I listened to the message twice. Let him worry. Let him wonder whether the brake line sabotage had worked. Only at noon did I finally return the call. Hello, son, I said hoarsely. Dad, you're alive. I mean, you're there, Nicholas stammered awkwardly. Where have you been? We were worried sick. I almost laughed. I just needed some air, I said calmly. After the meeting, I felt dizzy. Took a long walk. I'm staying with a friend in Queens for a few days, just resting before the big day. Oh, thank God, he said, the relief obvious. Then his voice shifted slightly. Listen, Dad. About the wedding. Yes, we're having a small family dinner tonight. Just us and the Hawthorne family. A little celebration before the ceremony. He hesitated. We'd really like you there? I smiled slowly. This was the invitation I had been waiting for. They wanted reassurance. They wanted to make sure the golden goose was still laying eggs. They wanted to smooth over any cracks before the main event. I'd love to come, I said. Send me the address. The restaurant was Lucu, one of the most expensive French dining rooms in the city. I arrived wearing a clean but clearly inexpensive suit I had purchased that morning at a department store near the airport. It was good enough to get past the host stand, but cheap enough to keep expectations low. Exactly what I wanted. When I approached the table, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Richard Hawthorne stood up with theatrical enthusiasm. He flashed a wide smile that revealed far too many teeth. The man was tall and handsome, in a slippery sort of way, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my first house. "Gus," he boomed loudly. "So good to see you." He extended his hand across the table. "We were just talking about your legendary farming skills. Nicholas says you're a wizard with soybeans." I shook his hand. It was soft. The hand of a man who had never worked a field lifted a shovel or fixed a broken tractor. "I get by," I said humbly. "Mostly I just listen to the land." We sat down. Amelia remained pressed against Nicholas's side, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. Her smile toward me was thin and forced. "So, Gus," Richard said, without wasting time, leaning forward eagerly. "Nicholas tells me you signed the transfer papers." He chuckled approvingly. "That's a bold move. A legacy move." His eyes gleamed. "We're going to do extraordinary things with Barrington Agritech. I've already been thinking about expansion into biofuels, opportunities that will blow your mind." "I'm sure you have," I said, taking a sip of water. Richard leaned even closer. In fact, he said quietly, "I have an opportunity right now. Here it comes. A drilling project in the Permian Basin. Absolute sure thing. But it requires capital. Quick capital." He spread his hands casually. An initial investment of $50 million would do it. $50 million. The number hung in the air like a bad smell. He wasn't just greedy. He was delusional. He expected me to hand him $50 million without hesitation. I glanced at Nicholas. He was watching me carefully, holding his breath. He knew the truth about Richard's finances. He knew about the debt. And yet he sat there silently waiting for his father to walk willingly into the slaughterhouse. I set my fork down slowly. Then I looked Richard directly in the eyes. $50 million is a lot of money," I said. Richard laughed loudly and slapped the table. "It takes money to make money, Gus." He leaned closer. "Come on, we're family now. Or we will be in 3 days." He winked. "Think of it as a wedding gift, a dowry for the merger." I paused. The silence stretched long enough for everyone at the table to feel uncomfortable. Then I looked at Amelia, then at Nicholas, then back to Richard. "You know what, Richard," I said, slowly. "You're right. Family supports family." The tension broke instantly. Richard exhaled loudly. Nicholas forced a nervous smile. "I'll tell you what," I continued. "I can't write the check tonight. My checkbook is back at the hotel." Richard leaned forward eagerly. "But I'll bring it to the wedding." I let the words settle. "I'll present a check for $50 million to the happy couple during the reception, a symbol of our new partnership." Richard's eyes practically popped out of his head. $50 million at the wedding. "Gus, you are a gentleman and a scholar. That will be the talk of the century." Amelia actually reached over and squeezed my hand. Her skin was cold. "Thank you, Gus. That is incredibly generous." Nicholas just stared at me, disbelief wearing with relief. "Thanks, Dad. You won't regret this." Oh, I knew I wouldn't regret it. I finished my meal listening to Richard brag about oil wells that didn't exist, and Amelia talk about her honeymoon in the Maldives. They were high on the promise of money. They were drunk on their own success. They thought they had won. They had no idea that I had just bought their execution date. The dinner ended. We walked out onto the street. Richard clapped me on the back. "See you at the altar, Gus. Don't be late and don't forget the checkbook." "I won't, Richard, I promised." I watched them get into a stretch limousine. Nicholas and Amelia got into his Porsche. They drove off into the night, leaving the old farmer on the curb. I took out my phone and texted Kat. "The bait is taken. They are expecting $50 million on Saturday," Kat replied instantly. "Perfect. The forensic team just finished with the audio from the bug. We have clear audio of Richard admitting to the brake tampering, and we have the bank records linking Nicholas to the Cayman account. It is a slam dunk." "Gus." "Good," I typed. "Bring the police to the venue, but tell them to wait. I want to give my speech first." I put the phone away and hailed a cab. The game was set. The players were in position. Now all I had to do was wait for the wedding, and I had a special slideshow to prepare. I sat in the silence of my hotel room, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the bruise forming on my forehead. The adrenaline from the truck incident had faded, replaced by a cold clinical detachment. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was calculating. The man who had hesitated to hurt his son was gone, left on the side of the highway in a cloud of brake dust. The man who remained was the CEO, and he was about to execute a hostile takeover of his own family. I picked up the phone and dialed Kat. We had spoken briefly after the accident, but now it was time for the details. I needed to know the trap was set before I could sleep. "The paperwork is ready, Gus." Kat said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. She knew me well enough to know I didn't want sympathy. I wanted results. "We have drafted the motion to invoke Clause 14B of the company bylaws." Clause 14. It was a fail-aff I had written into the corporate charter 20 years ago, back when I was fighting off sharks on Wall Street. It was the nuclear option. It stated that in the event of suspected gross negligence, fraud, or criminal misconduct by any executive officer, the chairman of the board, me, had the unilateral authority to seize all personal assets derived from company funds, freeze all associated accounts, and immediately terminate employment without board approval. It was a guillotine, and Nicholas had just stuck his neck right under the blade. "Do not file it with the court yet," I said, staring at the digital clock on the nightstand. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. "If we file now, the banks will lock him out before the sun comes up. I want him to feel safe for one more day. I want him to think he got away with it." "File it on Saturday morning, 1 hour before the ceremony begins," understood, Kat said. "That will ensure maximum impact. He will be standing at the altar when his credit cards stop working." "Exactly," I said. "Now tell me about the debt." I could hear the smile in her voice. "That is the best part, Gus. I spent the last 6 hours negotiating with the distressed asset division of Citibank. Richard Hawthorne wasn't just in debt. He was a liability they were desperate to get off their books. He has defaulted on 3 commercial loans. His mortgage is 6 months in arrears, and he has a personal line of credit that is maxed out at $4 million. And the collateral, I asked everything," Kat replied. "The penthouse in Manhattan is a rental, so he has no equity there. But the house in the Hamptons, the one he brags about, it is heavily leveraged, but the bank holds the deed, his car collection, his future earnings, even his life insurance policy. It was all tied to the loans." "Buy it," I said. "Buy it all." "I already did," she said. "I wired $12 million of your personal funds to the bank an hour ago. The transfer is complete. As of this moment, Peter Barrington is the sole holder of Richard Hawthorne's debt. You own him, Gus. You own the roof over his head, the shirt on his back, and the silver spoon in his mouth. You can foreclose on him whenever you want." I leaned back in the chair, a dark satisfaction spreading through my chest. $12 million was a fortune to most people. To me, it was the price of a shovel to bury a snake. Richard thought he was marrying his daughter into money. He didn't realize he had just sold his soul to the devil he tried to kill. "Hold the foreclosure notice," I instructed. "I want to serve him personally." "Saturday?" "Consider it done," Kat said. "There is one more thing. Gus." The forensic accountants flagged a massive pending transaction fee on the company credit card Nicholas carries. "The black card." I sat up straight. "How much? $500,000, she said. "It is a charge to the Belcourt Castle in Newport, Rhode Island. It is listed as venue finalization and catering expedite." I let out a low whistle. $500,000. He was throwing a $500,000 party on my dime, using a stolen credit card to celebrate stealing my company. The audacity was breathtaking. "Let it go through," I said. "Gus, that is $500,000, Kat warned. "If we let it clear, we might not get it back." "Let it clear," I repeated firmly. "If we decline the card now, he panics. He runs. He cancels the wedding and goes underground. I need him there on Saturday. I need him standing in front of all those people feeling like a king, so that when I knock him down, the fall breaks him. Besides, once Clause 14B kicks in, I will seize his personal assets to recoup the loss. Let him have his party. It is going to be the most expensive funeral in history." We hung up, and I sat there in the dark, watching the city lights of New York twinkle through the window. I felt like a spider sitting in the center of a very expensive web, waiting for the flies to stop struggling. For the next 2 days, I maintained radio silence. I stayed in my cheap hotel eating room service and watching the surveillance feed from my truck, which I had had towed to a secure lot. I monitored Nicholas's digital footprint. I watched him burn through cash like it was kindling. He hired a fleet of vintage Rolls Royces for the wedding party. He ordered cases of crystal champagne. He booked a private fireworks display over the bay. He was spending money. He didn't have money. He had stolen money. He thought I was too stupid to miss. Every notification that popped up on my phone was another nail in his coffin. On Friday afternoon, a courier arrived at the hotel. Nicholas had tracked me down likely through the company travel logs I hadn't bothered to hide. The courier handed me a heavy velvet-wrapped box. I opened it. Inside was the formal invitation. It was thick, heavy cardstock with gold leaf lettering engraved with the Barrington and Hawthorne crests. The Hawthorne crest was probably fake, invented by Richard to impress the gullible. The venue was indeed the Belcourt Castle in Newport, a playground for the old money aristocracy, a place where robber barons used to summer. It was fitting. My son was trying to be a robber baron, but he was just a robber. Tucked inside the invitation was a handwritten note on Nicholas's personal stationery. I picked it up expecting an apology or maybe a thank you for the $50 million I had promised at dinner. Instead, I read Dad. Here are the details. The ceremony starts at noon, sharp. Please, for the love of God, wear a decent suit. Buy a new one. Do not wear that funeral suit again. And try to scrub your hands. These photographers are from Vogue. Do not embarrass me. P.S. The 50 million check needs to be certified funds. I stared at the note. Do not embarrass me. I laughed. It was a dry rasping sound that hurt my throat. He was worried about his Vogue photos. He was worried about my fingernails. He was worried about the check. He had no idea that while he was picking out flower arrangements and yelling at caterers, I was buying his father-in-law's debt and preparing a criminal indictment. I took the note and the invitation and placed them carefully in my briefcase right next to the folder containing the bank records and the audio transcripts. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at the old man staring back at me. The eyes were tired, but they were sharp. The jaw was set. Nicholas wanted me to wear a nice suit. Fine. I went downstairs and hailed a cab to Fifth Avenue. I walked into the most expensive tailor I could find. I didn't look at the price tags. I bought a tuxedo made of Italian silk black as midnight sharp as a knife. I bought patent leather shoes. I bought a shirt that felt like water against my skin. I spent $10,000 in 30 minutes. If I was going to be the villain in his story, I was going to dress the part. I returned to the hotel and laid the suit out on the bed. It looked like armor. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Kat. The police are briefed. They will be waiting in the service wings of the castle. They will move on your signal. I typed back a single word. Good. I turned off the lights and lay down in the dark. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow my son was going to stand up and pledge his life to a fraud. And tomorrow I was going to stand up and take my life back. I closed my eyes and pictured the look on Nicholas's face when the music stopped. It was the only thing that allowed me to sleep. The quiet before the storm had ended. The thunder was about to roll. The waiter approached our table with practiced elegance, tilting a bottle of vintage Bordeaux as he filled Richard Hawthorne's glass. The deep red wine swirled slowly against the crystal, dark and thick like fresh blood. We were seated in the best corner of the restaurant, a private alcove draped in velvet curtains and shielded from the rest of the dining room by the soft hum of expensive conversations and clinking glasses. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like a family dinner, a reconciliation, a gesture of goodwill before the wedding. But I knew better. This wasn't peace. It was an ambush. 3 days before the ceremony, and the air around our table was so tense, it felt like you could slice it with a knife. Nicholas sat to my right, twisting his napkin into tight knots. His eyes kept darting back and forth between me and his future father-in-law, like a gambler waiting for the final card to be dealt. Across from me sat Amelia, radiant and confident. She looked like a woman who believed she had already won the lottery. Her smile glowed beneath the soft lighting, but there was something hard behind it, something calculating. And at the head of the table sat Richard Hawthorne. He leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who believed he owned the room. A king sitting on a throne he hadn't paid for. Meanwhile, I sat there in my cheap off-the-rack suit, deliberately rumpled, deliberately unimpressive, small, defeated. My hands rested openly on the table, exposing the dirt I had intentionally left beneath my fingernails. Let them see the farmer, let them see the fool. Gus Richard began leaning forward and resting his elbows on the white linen tablecloth. Since we're all family here, I'll speak plainly. He gave a quick smile, the kind that showed just enough teeth to feel unsettling. We're about to close on a tremendous opportunity in the Permian Basin. His voice lowered as if he were sharing a great secret. I'm talking about 3,000 acres of prime drilling territory. From beneath his chair, he pulled out a thick roll of maps and spread them across the table, pushing aside the breadbasket and butter dish. The paper rustled loudly against the linen. He tapped several red circles drawn across the map, his finger tracing imaginary rivers of wealth. This, he whispered reverently, is black gold, Gus. His eyes gleamed with barely restrained greed. We're looking at yields of 50,000 barrels a day within the first year. He looked up at me. But the window to secure the lease is closing. His voice dropped even further. We need liquidity, and we need it fast. I leaned forward and studied the maps through my smudged reading glasses. I had spent enough years dealing with land surveys and agricultural reports to recognize what I was looking at. The geological charts were generic, probably downloaded from a public government database. Nothing unique, nothing proprietary. Just a shiny toy meant to distract a simple country farmer. How much, I asked quietly. Richard didn't hesitate. $50 million for the initial buy-in. The number hung in the air like thunder. $50 million. Even for me, it was a massive amount. For a bankrupt con artist like Richard Hawthorne, it was a fantasy. He wasn't asking for an investment. He was asking for an escape vehicle. He needed that money to pay off the predators circling his life, to keep the IRS at bay, to keep the illusion alive for another year. I leaned back slowly in my chair and let out a long whistle. That's a lot of money, Richard. My assets are tied up in land and equipment. Liquidating that kind of cash takes time. Time is exactly what we don't have, Amelia interrupted. Her voice was soft and sweet, but underneath it ran a vein of pure poison. She reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. Her skin felt cool and perfectly dry. Uncle Gus, she said warmly, using the title that made my skin crawl. We're just worried about you. Her thumb traced a small circle against the back of my hand. Managing a company as large as Barrington Agritech must be exhausting. She tilted her head sympathetically. The stress alone could kill a man your age. Then she glanced toward Nicholas. A tiny nod, a signal. She's right, Dad, Nicholas said quickly, leaning forward. You've worked your whole life. You look tired. You should be relaxing, fishing, sitting on your porch watching the sunset. He gestured vaguely toward Richard. Let us handle the heavy lifting. Let Richard manage the investments. And let me run the company. I studied them carefully. The three of them formed a perfect triangle. Predators circling their prey. They were stripping the meat from my bones while I was still sitting at the table. Amelia's concern hid ambition. Nicholas's concern hid guilt. And Richard didn't bother hiding anything. He simply looked hungry. You want me to retire? I asked slowly. We want you to live, Amelia corrected gently, squeezing my hand again. If you invest this $50 million, if you let my father double your money, you'll never have to worry about crop reports or board meetings again. Her smile widened. You can simply enjoy life. It was a seductive offer. Give us your fortune and we'll let you fade quietly into the sunset. Or refuse. And accidents happen. I remembered the conversation from the truck, the loosened brake line, the calm way Richard had discussed my death. They already had a backup plan. If I resisted tonight, if I showed even the smallest hint of defiance, another accident would happen before I ever reached my hotel. They couldn't afford to let me walk away. They needed the money, or they needed me dead so Nicholas could inherit it. I looked down at the maps again. Then I thought about the $12 million of Richard's debt that I now owned. I thought about the forensic accounting report proving Nicholas had stolen from me. I thought about the prison cells waiting for them. And then I smiled, a weak, trembling old man's smile. You know what I said softly? You're right. My voice cracked slightly, just enough to sound convincing. I'm tired. I'm so tired of fighting the weather and the markets. I looked up at Richard. You really think this oil deal is guaranteed? Absolutely, Richard said instantly. His eyes widened with excitement. I'd stake my reputation on it. Your reputation isn't worth the steam off a hot dog, I thought. I drew in a slow breath. Then I looked at Nicholas. Sweat had begun forming along his hairline. He was terrified. He knew exactly what would happen if I refused. The lenders he owed money to would come collecting, and they wouldn't be nearly as polite as I was. Okay, I said quietly. The silence around the table was absolute. Okay, Richard repeated cautiously. I'll do it, I said. I straightened slightly in my chair. I believe in family, and if this brings our families together, then it's worth it. 50 million. Richard let out a loud shout that caused diners at nearby tables to turn their heads. He slammed his palm against the table, rattling the silverware. Gus, you're a visionary. You're saving. He caught himself. I mean, you're making the best decision of your life. We should sign the paperwork tonight, Amelia said immediately, reaching into her purse. I actually brought the transfer authorization with me. I raised my hand. Not tonight, dear. Her smile flickered. What do you mean, I don't have my checkbook with me? I said calmly. And my lawyers? I shrugged. You know how lawyers are. If I try wiring $50 million tonight, they'll flag the transaction. They'll freeze everything. Richard's eyes flashed with panic. So, when he asked quickly, we have to move fast. Saturday, I said firmly. The wedding. The wedding, Nicholas echoed in confusion. Yes. I leaned back, warming to the lie. It's perfect. All our friends will be there. The press will be there. I looked at Amelia. I want to present the check to you and Nicholas during the reception. A $50 million wedding gift. A symbol of the union between the Barrington and Hawthorne families. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Besides, it'll make a hell of a photo for Vogue, don't you think? The greed that flooded their faces was immediate, raw, animalistic. It was like watching wolves realize the sheep had just laid down and offered its throat. They didn't just want the money. They wanted the spectacle. They wanted the headlines. They wanted the world watching as they received $50 million. That's perfect, Amelia breathed. Her eyes were already glassy with Imagine magazine covers. It's brilliant, Richard agreed, pouring himself another glass of wine with a slightly shaking hand. Absolutely brilliant. A grand gesture. I turned my gaze toward Nicholas. The tension had drained from his body. He leaned back in his chair, relief washing over his face. For the first time that evening, his smile looked genuine. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "You have no idea what this means to us." "Oh, I had some idea. And then I saw it." Richard glanced quickly toward Nicholas. He gave a small, almost invisible shake of his head. Then he lifted his hand and tapped the side of his nose twice. It was a signal. I knew it in my gut. The hit was off. They didn't need to kill me anymore. In fact, they needed me alive. They needed me breathing and walking and holding a pen until Saturday noon. If I died in a car accident tonight, the estate would go into probate. The accounts would be frozen for months, maybe years. They couldn't wait that long. They needed the check on Saturday. I had just bought myself 3 days of life with a lie. "So it is settled," I said, picking up my water glass. 50 million on Saturday. To the future. To the future. They chorused, clinking their glasses against mine. I took a sip of water, watching them celebrate. They were already spending the money in their heads. Richard was probably calculating which debts to pay first. Amelia was likely upgrading her honeymoon suite. And Nicholas was just happy he wasn't going to have his legs broken by a bookie. I finished the dinner, listening to their inane chatter, enduring their fake compliments. When the check came, Richard made a show of reaching for his wallet, but I waved him off. "Let me, Richard," I said, pulling out my worn leather wallet. "Save your money for the drilling rights. You are a St. Gus," Richard said, putting his wallet away a little too quickly. I paid the bill, $2,000 for dinner. It was a small price to pay for the show I was about to put on. We walked out onto the street. The city air was cool. "I will see you all Saturday," I said. "I have to go get fitted for a new suit. Nicholas's orders." Nicholas laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Make it a good one, Dad. You're going to be on the front page." I watched them get into their cars. As they drove away, I let the smile drop from my face. I stood there on the sidewalk alone in the city that wanted to chew me up and spit me out. They thought they had won. They thought they had played the country bumpkin. They had no idea that the check I was bringing on Saturday wouldn't be for $50 million. It would be a bill for every lie, every theft, and every betrayal, and I was going to collect in full. I turned and walked toward the hotel, my stride ride long and purposeful. The brakes on my truck might have been broken, but the brakes on my vengeance were gone entirely. I had 3 days to prepare the slaughter, and I wasn't going to waste a single second. I took out my phone and sent one text to Kat. They took the bait. The accident is canceled. Proceed with the slideshow. Then I disappeared into the night, ready to become the nightmare they never saw coming. Friday morning dawned with a deceptive calm over Newport, Rhode Island. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the air smelled of salt and old money. I sat on the terrace of my hotel suite drinking coffee and watching the seagulls circle. I felt like a general surveying the battlefield before the first cannon shot. I checked my watch. It was 10 o'clock. The banks in New York had been open for an hour. Right on cue, my phone vibrated on the glass table. It was Nicholas. I let it buzz for a few seconds, imagining him standing at a teller window, sweat beading on his upper lip. I picked up Dad. "We have a problem." His voice was high, tight, and edged with hysteria. "A massive problem." I took a slow sip of coffee. "What is it, son?" "Slow down. I am at the bank," Nicholas stammered. I tried to withdraw the cash for the final catering deposit. "You know the expedited fee we talked about, and the card was declined." "Dad, it was declined." I made a noise of confusion in my throat. "Declined. That doesn't make sense. That card has a limit higher than most people's mortgages." "Did you try running it again?" "Yes, 3 times, he shouted. "The teller said the account is frozen." "Frozen, Dad, not just the company card. My personal accounts, too. Everything linked to the Barrington Trust. I can't access a dime. The wedding planner is standing right here, and she is looking at me like I am a pauper." I leaned back, smiling at the seagull. It was Clause 14B in action. Efficient, ruthless, immediate. The corporate immune system attacking the virus. "Now, son, don't panic," I said soothingly, putting on my best confused grandfather act. "You know how these modern banking systems are always glitching. Remember last year when they froze the payroll account? Because of a software update, I bet it is just a security flag because of the large transaction amount. But they won't unfreeze it," he whined. "They said it came from legal compliance." "Legal compliance," I repeated, tasting the words. "Well, That sounds like a mistake on their end. Listen to, I will call the bank president. I have known him for 30 years. I will get this sorted out. Can you do it now? He pleaded. Right now. I can't, son. I lied smoothly. I am heading into a fitting for my tuxedo. You insisted I look sharp, remember? And my old Rolodex with his private number is back at the farm. But I will call him first thing, Monday morning. Monday, Nicholas shrieked. The wedding is tomorrow. I need to pay these people today. Just write a personal check, I said. Or tell them to bill you. Tell them Peter Barrington guarantees the funds. My name is still good, isn't it? There was a pause. I could hear him breathing hard, trying to calm himself down. Yeah, your name is good. Okay, I will write a check. But you promise you will fix this Monday. I promise, son. Monday will be a day of reckoning for everyone. I hung up. He was safe for now. He would write a check that would bounce on Tuesday, but by Tuesday he would be in a jail cell, so his credit score would be the least of his worries. I finished my coffee and headed to the tailor shop downtown, where I had arranged for a final adjustment on my new tuxedo. Nicholas and Amelia were meeting me there. Amelia insisted on approving my look. She wanted to make sure I didn't look like I fell off a turnip truck, as she put it. When I arrived, they were already there. Nicholas looked pale, shaking his leg nervously as he sat on a velvet ottoman. Amelia was pacing her heels, clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. She looked like a jungle cat, stalking prey. Her eyes narrowed when I walked in. There you are, she said sharply. We don't have all day, Gus. Try the suit on and please tell me you showered. I ignored the jab and took the garment bag from the tailor, stepping into the changing room. I hung my old jacket, the cheap one I had worn to dinner, on the hook behind the heavy velvet curtain. I took off my shirt and started to change. Outside the curtain I could hear them whispering. Did you write the check? Amelia hissed. Yes, but I am terrified it is going to bounce, Nicholas whispered back. He said he would fix it Monday. He said it is a glitch. A glitch, Amelia scoffed. That is convenient. Banks don't just freeze accounts for glitches, Nicholas. Not accounts that size. Do you think he knows? How could he know, Nicholas argued. He is clueless. He thinks the internet is a series of tubes. He just signed over the company to me without reading the fine print. He is a farmer, Amelia. He isn't playing 4D chess. I stood there in the changing room, trousers half pulled up, listening. I had made a mistake. A small, careless mistake born of arrogance. In the inside pocket of my cheap jacket, hanging on the hook, was a business card. Not just any card. It was the card Kat had given me for the private investigator who handled the surveillance on the Hawthorne family. It was plain white with bold black text. Global Forensic Investigations, Asset Recovery Fraud Detection. And underneath it in my handwriting, I had scrolled a note. Richard Hawthorne, bankruptcy confirmed. I buttoned my trousers, my heart rate picking up. I needed to get that jacket back on before she saw it. I stepped out of the changing room, wearing the tuxedo pants and the crisp white shirt. The tailor moved in to adjust the cuffs. Dad, the pants look a little long, Nicholas said, distracting me. While the tailor was pinning the hem, I saw Amelia move. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were locked on the changing room on my jacket. I am just going to check the lining, she said, her voice casual. Too casual. Make sure they didn't use that cheap polyester blend. Wait, Amelia, I said, trying to step forward. But the Tor held me back. Sir, please hold still, or the hem will be uneven. Amelia slipped behind the curtain. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the rustle of fabric. I could hear Nicholas sighing, scrolling through his phone. I could hear the tailor humming a tune. Then silence. The silence that followed wasn't long, only a few seconds, but it stretched so tightly it felt like time itself had stopped breathing. When Amelia finally stepped out of the fitting room, her face had changed completely. The confident glow she had worn earlier was gone. Now her expression was carved from stone. All the color had drained from her cheeks, leaving the heavy makeup on her face standing out like war paint before a battle. She wasn't holding my jacket. She was holding her phone. Her knuckles were white around it. For a moment our eyes met. The disgust she usually wore when looking at me had vanished. In its place was something colder, fear, and realization. She knew. She didn't speak to me, not a single word. Instead, she turned sharply and strode toward Nicholas, who was sitting comfortably on the ottoman near the mirror. Without warning, she grabbed him by the ear and yanked him to his feet. Ow, Tiff! What the hell, he protested. We need to go, she said under her breath, her voice vibrating with urgency. Now. But Dad hasn't finished the fitting, Nicholas said, confused. Forget the damn fitting, Amelia snapped. We have a crisis. She practically dragged him toward the door. Nicholas twisted his head back over his shoulder. I'll see you later, Daddy called. I didn't respond. I simply watched them leave. Through the boutique's front window, I saw them reach the sidewalk. Amelia leaned close to Nicholas, immediately speaking in rapid, tense bursts. Her hands moved sharply through the air as she explained something. She had found the card. She had seen the message I had left behind. She now understood that the quiet old farmer they had mocked wasn't senile at all. She understood something else, too. I wasn't prey. I was hunting them. The tailor stood up from his kneeling position beside the platform and brushed imaginary lint from his trousers. "Excellent fit, sir," he said politely. "Just excellent." I looked at him. Then I glanced back toward the dressing room, where my jacket hung the jacket that had exposed my secret. "Keep the suit," I said calmly as I began removing the shirt he had fitted earlier. "I won't be needing it for a wedding." I paused. "I'll be needing it for a war." I changed quickly into my old clothes and walked out of the shop. I needed to move fast. They were spooked now. And a frightened animal is the most dangerous creature in the world. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I expected Nicholas or Kat. But when I pulled it out, the screen showed a message from an unknown number. I opened it. "The old man knows something. We cannot wait for Saturday. We have to act tonight." Beneath the text was a screenshot of the message. Kat had intercepted it. It had been sent from Amelia's phone to her father, Richard Hawthorne. I stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. Pedestrians flowed around me like water around a rock. Tonight. They weren't going to wait for the wedding. They weren't going to wait for the check. They knew something had gone wrong, and now they were going to force my hand, or silence me permanently. I lifted my eyes toward the sky. The sun was already dropping behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the streets of Manhattan. Darkness was coming. I raised my hand and flagged down a taxi. "Hotel," I told the driver when I climbed inside. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. If they wanted to come for me tonight, let them. I had $12 million of leverage hanging over their heads, and a lifetime of experience dealing with stubborn mules. I returned to my hotel room and pulled a chair directly across from the door. I didn't turn on the lights. I simply sat in the darkness, waiting. The hours passed slowly. The hotel settled into the quiet rhythms of night-distant elevators, muffled footsteps in the hallway, the faint hum of air vents. They believed I was the prey. They were about to discover I was the trap. The digital clock on the bedside table flickered to 3 a.m. The room was silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner and the distant roar of waves crashing against the cliffs of Newport. I wasn't in the bed. Instead, I had arranged the pillows beneath the blankets so they formed the shape of a sleeping body. A trick I had learned decades ago in a very different kind of jungle. I sat in the tall armchair in the corner of the room, hidden in thick shadows. My breathing was slow, controlled. I knew they would come. Amelia discovering that business card had changed everything. Their greed had transformed into panic, and panic makes people reckless. They couldn't risk waiting until the wedding. They couldn't risk giving me time to expose them. Tonight they needed to secure their future, or destroy me. The electronic lock clicked softly. A faint green light flashed on the door handle. Someone had a master key. The door opened slowly. A thin strip of hallway light stretched across the carpet, widening inch by inch. Then a silhouette stepped inside, tall, broad shoulders. The door closed quietly behind him. He moved cautiously toward the bed, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. In his right hand, something glinted faintly in the moonlight, filtering through the curtains. A knife, small, sharp, probably stolen from a room service tray or a fruit basket. A coward's weapon, held by a desperate man. I waited. He reached the bed, raised his arm, prepared to strike the mound of pillows beneath the blanket. "Hello, Richard," I said calmly. My voice rolled through the darkness. Richard Hawthorne spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. The knife slashed wildly through the air. "Jesus Christ," he hissed. His eyes darted across the dark room. "Where are you?" "I'm right here, Richard," I replied, "watching you attempt murder with a fruit knife. Honestly, it's pathetic." His eyes finally found me in the shadows. He took a cautious step closer. The moonlight revealed his face. Sweat covered his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a trapped rat showing its teeth. "You know," he spat. "You know everything, don't you?" Amelia found the card. "You're not just some farmer. You're investigating us." "I am a farmer," I said calmly, remaining seated. "I'm simply a farmer who knows how to recognize a weed before it strangles the entire crop." "I don't care who you are," he snarled, stepping closer. "This ends tonight. You're going to sign the real transfer papers, not that fake garbage you gave Nicholas." He lifted the knife slightly. I checked the signatures. "Gus, August." He laughed bitterly. "Very clever. But tonight you're signing your full legal name, and you're transferring $50 million. right now. And if I don't, I asked. Richard's smile twisted. Then you have a heart attack. He raised the knife. You're old. It happens. The stress of the wedding. Too much for your heart. He lunged. It was sloppy. Amateur. He telegraphed the attack from a mile away. His shoulder led the movement. His weight leaned too far forward. He saw an old man sitting in a chair. What he didn't see was the 18-year-old boy who enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1968. He didn't see the sergeant who led reconnaissance patrols through the Mekong Delta. He didn't see the man who had learned how to kill long before he ever learned how to negotiate a business contract. I didn't even stand up. As the knife came forward, I caught his wrist with my left hand. My grip closed like a steel vise forged by 50 years of wrestling steers and hauling hay bales. I twisted sharply outward. Direct pressure on the ulnar nerve. Richard screamed, a high, shocked wail. The knife fell from his hand and clattered across the floor. In the same motion, I rose from the chair, kicked his legs out from under him, and slammed him face first into the carpet. I wrenched his arm behind his back, pushing upward until the shoulder joint popped dangerously close to dislocating. My knee pressed firmly into his lower spine. Pinned, like a hog waiting to be branded. "Get off me!" he shrieked, struggling uselessly. "Do you know who I am?" I leaned down until my mouth was inches from his ear. "Yes," I whispered. "I know exactly who you are. You're a bankrupt fraud. A man who owes $15 million to the IRS. A man who rents his penthouse and leases his cars. A parasite." I pushed his arm slightly higher. He whimpered into the carpet. "But here is what you don't know, Richard. You don't know who owns you." "What are you talking about?" He gasped, sweat dripping from his face onto the floor. "Yesterday morning, I bought your debt." I whispered, my voice cold and hard. "All of it." Citibank was very eager to sell. "I own your mortgage, Richard. I own the liens on your business. I own your personal line of credit. I paid $12 million cash for the privilege of holding the leash around your neck." He went still, the fight drained out of him, instantly replaced by a cold, terrifying realization. You bought my debt, every penny I confirmed, which means, Richard, that I am your landlord. I am your banker, and I am your executioner. If I die tonight, Richard, if you somehow manage to kill me, do you know what happens tomorrow morning? He didn't answer. He was shaking violently now. "My estate executes the will," I continued. "And my will has a very specific instruction regarding your debt. Immediate foreclosure. My lawyers will seize the house in the Hamptons. They will seize the cars. They will garnish every cent you ever make. You will be on the street, Richard. You will be destitute. You will be nothing." I could feel him sobbing beneath me. It was a pathetic, broken sound, but I said, easing the pressure on his arm just a fraction. "If I live, if I walk down that aisle tomorrow and give my speech, then maybe, just maybe I will be a benevolent creditor. Maybe I won't take the roof over your head. I am worth more to you alive than dead, Richard. You need me to breathe." I stood up and stepped back, allowing him to scramble to his feet. He looked at me with terror in his eyes, cradling his injured arm. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair messed. He looked like exactly what he was, a ruin. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. He backed away, stumbling over his own feet. "Wait," he stammered. "The money, the 50 million. I laughed. It was a dark sound. "You are still thinking about the money, you greedy fool. Go to bed, Richard. Rest up for the wedding. You are going to need your strength." He reached for the door handle, his hand shaking so bad he missed it the first time. "And, Richard," I called out, stopping him one last time. He froze, looking back at me like a deer in the headlights. "Do not tell Nicholas I warned. Do not tell Amelia. If they know you are broke, if they know I own you, they will turn on you. They will see you as a liability. You need them to believe the lie until the very end, don't you?" He nodded slowly, realizing the trap he was in. He couldn't warn them. He couldn't tell them to run, because if he did, he would have to admit that he had nothing. He would have to admit that he had failed. His pride and his greed were the bars of his cage. "I won't tell them," he whispered. "Good. Now get out of my sight." He fled into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him. I locked it and engaged the deadbolt. Then I picked up the paring knife from the floor. I tested the edge with my thumb. It was dull. It wouldn't have cut a steak, let alone a man. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark grounds of the resort. I could see the white tents set up on the lawn, ghost-like in the moonlight. I could see the staff moving tables, preparing for the celebration. Richard wouldn't talk. Fear was a powerful silencer. He would spend the next 12 hours terrified, praying that I would show mercy, praying that the check would still come. He would smile for the cameras. He would shake hands. He would play his part because he had no other choice. I went back to the armchair and sat down. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sun come up over the Atlantic Ocean, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Today was the day my son got married, the day I destroyed my family to save my company. I stood up and walked to the closet where the $10,000 tuxedo hung in its garment bag. I took a shower, scrubbing the smell of Richard's fear off my hands. I shaved carefully, nicking my chin once. I watched the droplet of blood well up and wiped it away. It was time to put on the costume. It was time to play the benevolent father one last time. I dressed slowly, savoring the feel of the silk and the wool. I tied the bow tie with precision, my fingers nimble and sure. I looked in the mirror. The farmer was gone. The Marine was gone. The CEO was ready. I grabbed the briefcase containing the evidence. I grabbed the thumb drive with the presentation. I walked out of the room, leaving the paring knife on the nightstand, a silent message for the maid. The hallway was quiet, the calm before the storm. I took the elevator down to the lobby, where the guests were already gathering their laughter bright and brittle. I saw Nicholas across the room. He looked nervous, scanning the crowd. When he saw me, he relaxed visibly. He saw the tuxedo. He saw the smile I plastered on my face. He thought he was safe. He waved me over. "Dad, you look amazing," he exclaimed, grabbing my shoulder. "See, I knew you could clean up." Well, I looked at him, my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. The man who had hired a mechanic to cut my brakes. "Thank you, son," I said. "I wanted to look my best for your big day." "Are you ready?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Do you have the, I patted my breast pocket where a single envelope sat. "I have it right here," I said. He grinned. It was the smile of a man who thinks he has gotten away with murder. "Let's get married then," he said. We walked together toward the ballroom, father and son walking toward the slaughter. And as the wedding march began to play, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was finished. All that was left was the screaming. The ballroom of Belcourt Castle was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal filled to the brim with 500 of the most beautiful liars on the East Coast. The air smelled of expensive lies and desperation. I sat at the head table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching my son parade around the room like a conquering hero. He was shaking hands, clapping backs, and laughing that hollow practice laugh he had learned in business school. He looked at me every few minutes, his eyes darting to the breast pocket of my tuxedo where the envelope sat. He was checking on his money. Amelia was a different story. She sat next to him looking radiant in a custom Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than a combine harvester. But her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. She hadn't said a word to me since the incident at the tailor. She knew she had seen the investigator's card, but she was trapped in the momentum of her own greed. She couldn't stop the wedding now without exposing the fraud. So she was just holding on, praying that I was too stupid or too cowed to do anything about it. Across the table, Richard Hawthorne was sweating through his suit. He was holding his right arm stiffly against his side, cradling the shoulder I had nearly dislocated the night before. Every time our eyes met, he flinched. He looked pale, sickly, a man who was waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. He knew I owned him. He knew I could take the roof over his head with a single phone call, but he also knew he had to play the part of the wealthy oil baron for one more hour if he wanted to see that $50 million check. The ceremony itself had been a blur of hypocrisy. I watched my son pledge his eternal love to a woman who saw him as a bank account. I watched her promise to honor a man she planned to institutionalize. It was the most expensive theatrical performance I had ever witnessed. Now, the reception was in full swing. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of caviar and foie gras. A 10-piece orchestra played soft jazz. It was perfect. It was flawless. It was a lie. I checked my watch. It was time. I caught the eye of a young man standing near the audio-visual booth at the back of the room. He was wearing a generic black technician's uniform, but he wasn't on the castle's payroll. He was one of Kat's forensic specialists. He gave me a subtle nod. The system was hijacked. We were live. Nicholas stood up and tapped his spoon against his champagne glass. The crystal chime cut through the chatter. The room fell silent. "Attention, everyone." Nicholas announced, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "If I could have your attention for a moment." The guests turned toward the head table, their faces masks of polite interest. "Today is the happiest day of my life." Nicholas continued, placing a hand on Amelia's shoulder. She flinched slightly but forced a smile. "I have married the woman of my dreams, and I have merged two great families, but this celebration wouldn't be possible without the support of one man." He turned toward me, extending his hand. "My father, Peter Barrington Agritech." Applause rippled through the room, polite, tepid applause. To them, I was just the eccentric farmer who paid the bills. My dad is a man of few words, Nicholas said, grinning. He is a simple man, a man of the earth, but he has a heart of gold. And tonight, he has prepared a very special gift for us. A gift that symbolizes the future of Barrington Agritech and the Hawthorne legacy. He looked at me, his eyes hungry. Come on up here, Dad. Don't be shy. Before I reveal what happened when I walked onto that stage type, still here in the comments, so I know you're watching with me. The next moment changed everything in that room. And just a quick note, the following part of this story includes some fictional elements for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, you're welcome to stop here. I rose slowly from my chair and buttoned the front of my tuxedo jacket. Tonight I did not look like a humble man who spent his days walking cornfields and repairing broken irrigation pipes. The suit I wore was Italian silk tailored perfectly to my frame and worth more than most of the guests in the room would guess. My hair had been trimmed, my jaw was set, every movement was deliberate. I didn't look like a farmer. I looked like a shark wearing human skin. The ballroom fell quieter as I walked toward the microphone. The sound of my footsteps echoed faintly across the polished stone floor. Hundreds of guests watched in silence. I could feel the tension pouring from the head table where Richard, Amelia, and Nicholas sat. They were holding their breath, waiting. I stepped onto the stage and adjusted the microphone slightly. The speakers carried the soft sound of the movement through the enormous vaulted ceiling of the castle ballroom. I looked out across the crowd. Bankers, investors, socialites, men and women who measured a person's value by the cut of a suit and the size of a trust fund. Thank you, Nicholas, I said calmly. My voice was steady, clear. My son tells me he wants a wedding gift that symbolizes our shared future. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. Nicholas's eyes snapped to it instantly. He leaned forward in his chair like a hunting dog spotting a rabbit. He says he wants an investment, I continued. $50 million. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. 50 million. The number floated through the room like something intoxicating. I slowly turned the envelope over in my hands. That is a great deal of money, I said thoughtfully. Money that comes from dirt, from mud, from fertilizer. I paused. The very smell my son seems to dislike so much. Nicholas's smile flickered briefly, just for a moment. Then he forced it back. But family, I continued slowly, is about more than money. It's about truth. It's about transparency. And since we are all family here tonight, I looked directly at Amelia. Her face had gone completely white. She shook her head slightly, her eyes begging silently. Don't do it. Please don't do it. I smiled at her. A cold smile. You want the 50 million, I asked the room. Yes, Richard blurted out from the table before he could stop himself. A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Well, I said calmly, you can have it. A murmur spread instantly. But first, I paused. I have a little presentation, a slideshow. I think it's important everyone here sees exactly what this marriage and this merger is built on. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The lights in the ballroom dimmed instantly. A massive projection screen slowly descended from the ceiling behind the stage. Nicholas leaned toward me, confused. Dad, he whispered urgently. What is this? We didn't plan a slideshow. Just watch, son, I replied quietly. You're the star. The screen flickered. For a moment, it remained blank. Then an image appeared, a stark white background. In the center of the screen glowed a blue seal, the emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The ballroom fell completely silent. Every whisper died instantly. The image shifted. Now the screen showed grainy black and white video. The angle was low, hidden. The camera looked upward toward a conference table. It was footage taken from beneath the table in Nicholas's office. The audio burst through the ballroom speakers. Clear. Unmistakable. Is he gone? Amelia's voice rang out across the room. Sharp, cruel, unmistakable. God, the smell lingers. Open a window. On stage, Amelia let out a choked cry. She slapped her hands over her mouth. The video continued. He signed it. Nicholas's voice said excitedly, We have control. 80% of the voting stock. We own Barrington Agritech. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the audience. But the worst was still coming. As soon as the wedding is over, Amelia's voice continued from the recording, we declare him mentally incompetent. Alzheimer's. We send him to that state facility in Nebraska. The cheap one. He won't last 6 months. The ballroom erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Chairs scraping across the floor as people jumped to their feet. Nicholas stood frozen beside me, staring at the screen like a man watching his own execution. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He turned toward me slowly. Dad, he croaked, I didn't look at him. I watched the screen. The image changed again. Now a series of bank records appeared. Clear, organized, precise. A forensic accounting summary. Unauthorized transfers. $3 million from Barrington Agritech accounts. Beneficiary Richard Hawthorne. The screen split into two sections. On one side, the Cayman Islands account. On the other, Richard Hawthorne's bankruptcy filings and federal tax liens. The room exploded into chaos. Guests shouted over one another. Phones appeared everywhere as people began recording the spectacle. The thin mask of polite society had shattered. But I wasn't finished yet. The screen changed once more. Now it displayed an audio waveform, a recording. Richard's voice echoed through the speakers. I had my mechanic take a look at his truck. He loosened the brake line just a little. An unfortunate accident. The accusation hung in the air. Attempted murder. Heavier than the crystal chandeliers above us. I stepped forward toward the microphone again. Slowly. The crowd quieted, drawn by the gravity of the moment. Not out of respect, but fascination. Morbid fascination. I turned toward Nicholas, then Amelia, then Richard. You called me a stinky country boy, I said calmly. You thought I was a senile old fool. You believed you could milk me dry and then lock me away to die. I lifted the envelope and tore it in half. The ripping sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Then I tore it again. And again. The pieces fluttered from my hands and drifted to the floor like paper snow. There's your 50 million, I said quietly. Nicholas lunged forward. Dad, stop. Turn it off. You're ruining everything. I stepped backward. Two large men in dark suits emerged from behind the stage curtains. My private security team. They blocked Nicholas easily. I'm not ruining anything, son, I said coldly. I'm fixing it. I'm taking out the trash. I turned toward the stunned audience. Enjoy the dinner, everyone. I paid for it. But I won't be staying for the cake. I raised my hand and pointed toward the back of the ballroom. The massive double doors exploded open with a loud bang. A dozen police officers in tactical gear poured into the room. Behind them came federal agents wearing dark blue FBI windbreakers. Nicholas turned slowly toward them. His face had gone completely white. Run! Richard shouted desperately as he knocked over his chair. His wine glass crashed onto the table. Red Bordeaux spilled across the white linen cloth like fresh blood. But there was nowhere to run. The trap had already closed. I stood on the stage, watching. The master of ceremonies for their destruction, Justice marched down the aisle toward the head table. Behind me, the enormous screen still glowed with the cold blue seal of the FBI. The silence that followed felt unnatural, like the air itself had been pulled from the room. 500 guests sat frozen in their seats. Champagne glasses hung halfway to their lips, eyes locked on the stage. Beside me, I could hear Nicholas's breathing, shallow, panicked, like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was a trap door. I didn't look at him. Instead, I looked out across the sea of stunned faces. Watch closely, I said calmly into the microphone. The FBI seal faded, and the screen changed once again. The grainy black and white video began to play. It was the footage from under the mahogany conference table in Nicholas's office. The angle was low, capturing the shine shoes of my son and the designer heels of his fiancée. But the audio was crystal clear, amplified by the massive speakers of the ballroom. Is he gone? Amelia's voice rang out sharp and cruel, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. God, the smell lingers. Open a window. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. On the stage, Amelia let out a strangled sound, her hands flying to her mouth, her face draining of all color. She looked like a ghost in a wedding dress. The video continued mercilessly. He signed it. Nicholas's recorded voice boasted, dripping with arrogance. We have control, 80% of the voting stock. We own Barrington Agritech. I watched the guests. I saw the confusion turning to shock. They were witnessing a coup, a betrayal so naked and ugly, it made them look away. But they couldn't stop watching. Then came the part that would seal their fate. As soon as the wedding is over, Amelia's voice said, cold as ice. We declare him mentally incompetent. Alzheimer's. We put him in that state facility in Nebraska, the cheap one. He won't last 6 months. A woman in the front row dropped her wine glass. It shattered the sound, piercing the tension. People were standing up now, whispering, pointing phones, recording the downfall of the golden couple. Nicholas was shaking his head, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to stop it, but I was done stopping. I was done protecting him. I clicked the remote in my hand. The video cut to a new slide. This wasn't grainy footage. This was high-def and forensic accounting, a bank statement projected 10 feet high for everyone to see. It showed a wire transfer of $3 million from the Barrington subsidiary account. The beneficiary was highlighted in red, Richard Hawthorne, and right next to it, a split screen showing Richard's bankruptcy filings from the state of Texas and the tax liens filed by the IRS totaling $15 million. The room erupted. It wasn't polite murmurs anymore. It was chaos. I saw bankers in the crowd recognizing the documents, realizing they had been rubbing elbows with a fraud. I saw Richard Hawthorne slumped in his chair looking like a man who had just been shot. He was staring at the screen, seeing his lies stripped away layer by layer, leaving him naked and shivering in the light of truth. But I had one more nail to drive into the coffin. I clicked the remote again. The screen went black and then a waveform appeared. Green lines jagged against the darkness. I hit play. The audio was from the bug in my truck. The sound of Richard's voice filled the room, low and conspiratorial. I had my mechanic take a look at his truck. He loosened the brake line. Just a little. An unfortunate accident. The word accident hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The accusation of attempted murder. The room went deadly silent again. The kind of silence that comes before a scream. I turned off the screen. I wanted them to look at me now. Not at the evidence, but at the man they had tried to kill. I walked to the edge of the stage. The spotlight hit me blindingly bright, but I didn't blink. I looked down at Amelia, who was trembling so violently her veil was shaking. "Amelia?" I said, my voice booming without shouting. "You called me a stinky country boy. You said I polluted your air." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You were right. I do smell. I smell of dirt and sweat and the diesel of a tractor. I smell of 40 years of waking up before dawn to feed the world. I smell of honest labor." I took a step closer, looking her dead in the eye. "But you, Amelia, you and your father, and my son, you smell of something else entirely. You smell of rot. You smell of greed that is so deep, it has eaten away your souls. You smell of decay." I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the thick cream-colored envelope, the one Nicholas had been staring at all night, the one he thought contained his salvation. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out instinctively. "Dad, please." I held the envelope up to the light. "You wanted $50 million, I said. You wanted a symbol of our future." I ripped the envelope in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud, crisp, and final. Nicholas flinched as if I had struck him. I put the halves together and ripped them again and again. I shredded the check into tiny, worthless pieces. I opened my hand and let the confetti rain down onto the stage floor, drifting over Nicholas's polished shoes. "There is your inheritance," I said, cold and final. "There is your $50 million. It is dust just like your lies." Nicholas fell to his knees in the pile of torn paper, frantically trying to gather the pieces as if he could tape his life back together. It was a pathetic sight. A man destroyed by his own avarice, scrambling in the debris of his expectations. Suddenly a sound cut through the murmuring of the crowd. It started low and distant, but it was getting louder by the second. A rising wail that everyone recognized. Sirens, dozens of them, screaming up the long driveway of the castle. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows, painting the ballroom in the colors of emergency. I looked at Richard Hawthorne. He was trying to stand up, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He knew what that sound meant. He knew the debt collector had arrived, and he wasn't wearing a suit this time. I looked at Amelia. She was sobbing, ruining her makeup, her perfect mask melting away to reveal the terrified child underneath. And I looked at my son, still on his knees, holding a scrap of paper that meant nothing. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, hollow sadness. But beneath the sadness was relief. The cancer had been cut out. The wound was clean. The doors at the back of the room burst open. I stepped back from the microphone and folded my hands. The show was over. Now it was time for the reckoning. The double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They exploded inward. The heavy oak panels slammed against the walls with a violence that shook the crystal drops on the chandeliers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The orchestra had stopped playing mid-note, leaving a jagged silence hanging in the air. Then the room was flooded with a sea of dark blue uniforms. Police officers in tactical gear swarmed the perimeter, their boots heavy on the parquet floor, moving with a precision that terrified the soft, pampered guests. Behind them came the men in suits the FBI agents Kat had coordinated with. They moved like sharks through a school of tropical fish, cutting through the crowd of socialites and bankers who scrambled to get out of the way, knocking over chairs and spilling champagne in their haste to distance themselves from the head table. I stood on the stage, my hands clasped behind my back, watching the chaos unfold. I felt like a conductor who had just signaled the crescendo of a violent symphony. Nicholas was still on his knees, surrounded by the confetti of the $50 million check. He looked up, his eyes unfocused, as a pair of detectives marched straight toward him. He tried to stand up, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated, but his legs wouldn't support him. Nicholas Wayite. One of the detectives barked, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd. "You are under arrest." Nicholas blinked, looking around as if he expected someone to yell "cut" and end the scene. "Arrested?" he stammered, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "For what?" "This is a wedding. You cannot arrest me at my wedding." "Do you know who I am?" The detective didn't blink. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted under the stage lights. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Barrington. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder." The word murder hit the room like a physical blow. A woman near the front fainted, sliding out of her chair in a rustle of silk. Murder. Nicholas shrieked, his voice cracking. "That is insane!" "I never hurt anyone." "We have the mechanic in custody," the detective said, grabbing Nicholas's wrist and twisting it behind his back. "He rolled on you 20 minutes ago. He confirmed you and Richard Hawthorne paid him $5,000 to tamper with the brake lines of Peter Barrington's vehicle. We have the text messages. We have the bank transfer. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was final, irreversible. Nicholas looked at me then. His face was a mask of sheer terror. The arrogance was gone. The NBA confidence was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who had played with matches and burned the house down. "Dad, tell them," he begged, struggling against the detective's grip. "Tell them it is a mistake." I looked at him, and I said nothing. I just watched. That was when Amelia broke. The shock that had paralyzed her shattered, and beneath it was a rage so pure and ugly, it transformed her completely. She wasn't the blushing bride anymore. She wasn't the sophisticated socialite. She was a cornered animal. "You old bastard!" she screamed. She lunged at me. She moved faster than I expected, her hands curled into claws, reaching for my face. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to tear the eyes out of the man who had ruined her perfect day. Her veil tore as she scrambled over the monitors at the edge of the stage. Her designer dress snagged on a light fixture, ripping the expensive lace, but she didn't care. She was screaming obscenities, words that would make a sailor blush, pouring out of her mouth in a torrent of hate. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Before she could reach me, a massive wall of muscle stepped in front of me. It was my head of security, a man who used to play linebacker for the Bears. He caught Amelia in midair, grabbing her arms and holding her back as easily as if she were a doll. "Let me go," she shrieked, kicking and spitting. "I will kill him. I will kill you for this, you dirty old farmer. You ruined my life. I was supposed to be rich. I was supposed to be someone." I stepped out from behind my guard and looked at her. Her makeup was smeared across her face in black streaks. Her hair was wild. The mask of the aristocracy had fallen away, completely revealing the gutter she had crawled out of. "You were never rich, Amelia," I said, my voice calm amidst the screaming. "You were just expensive. There is a difference." A female officer stepped up and took Amelia from the guard zip, tying her hands behind her back. She dragged the bride away, kicking and screaming, her heels carving lines into the stage floor. That left Richard. He hadn't moved from his chair. He was sitting there staring at the tablecloth, his face gray. He looked like a man who was already dead, but hadn't fallen over yet. He knew the murder charge included him. He knew the fraud charges included him, but he was clinging to one last shred of denial. I walked down the stairs from the stage and approached the table. The guests parted for me, terrified. I stopped next to Richard. He didn't look up. "Richard," I said softly. He flinched. I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo and pulled out a folded document. It was thick legal paper stamped with the seal of the Rhode Island Superior Court. I dropped it onto the table in front of him, right on top of the wine stain. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "That is an eviction notice," I said, "and a notice of foreclosure and a seizure order for all personal assets." He looked up at me, his eyes wet and pathetic. "But you said if I didn't tell them, you said you would be benevolent." "I lied, Richard," I said, leaning in close. "Just like you lied about the oil wells. Just like you lied about loving my family. I bought your debt, Richard. I own the mortgage on your house in the Hamptons. I own the lease on your penthouse. I own the loan on your Bentley. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, I called in every single note. I checked my watch. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Richard. The locks are being changed tomorrow at noon. The cars are being repossessed as we speak. You are bankrupt. You are homeless. And you are going to prison. He made a sound, a high-pitched whimper like a kicked dog. He reached out to grab my sleeve, his fingers trembling. "Gus, please, where will I go? I have nothing." I pulled my arm away, brushing the sleeve of my $10,000 suit as if he had dirtied it. "I hear the federal penitentiary has a bed waiting for you," I said. "3 hots and a cot, Richard. It is more than you deserve." 2 officers moved in and hauled him out of the chair. He didn't fight. He just sagged, a weeping mess of a man who had built a castle on sand and was surprised when the tide came in. The room was clearing out now. The guests were fleeing, trying to escape the scandal before the news crews arrived. But the police were blocking the exits, taking names, taking statements. No one was leaving without going on the record. I turned to go. I had done what I came to do. "Dad." The voice stopped me. It was Nicholas. He was near the service exit, flanked by 2 detectives. He had stopped struggling. He was looking at me, tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfect tan. "Dad, please." He sobbed, his voice breaking. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I got lost, okay? I got scared. But I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You can't let them take me. You can't let me go to prison." I walked over to him. I stopped a foot away. I looked at his face, searching for the little boy I used to take, fishing, searching for the young man I had been so proud of when he graduated. But I didn't see him. I only saw a stranger who had looked me in the eye and sentenced me to a slow death in a cheap nursing home, a stranger who had tried to kill me for an inheritance. "We are family." "Dad," he pleaded, seeing the look on my face. "Family forgives." I looked at him with eyes that were dry and cold. "You are right, Nicholas," I said. "Family forgives. But you are not my family. Not anymore." He recoiled as if I had slapped him. "What, my son died a long time ago?" I said, my voice steady. "He died the moment he decided that money was worth more than his father's life. You are not my son, Nicholas. You are a parasite. You are a tick that burrowed into my side and sucked my blood for 30 years. I leaned in close so only he could hear the final verdict. "And today, I am deworming the farm." Nicholas stared at me, his mouth open in shock. The hope died in his eyes, replaced by a desolate emptiness. He knew then that there was no coming back. There was no bailout. There was no safety net. "Take him away," I said to the detectives. They pushed him through the doors. He didn't look back. He hung his head and let them drag him into the waiting cruiser. I stood alone in the center of the ruined wedding. The flowers were wilting. The ice sculptures were melting, dripping water onto the floor like tears. The air still smelled of expensive perfume, but underneath it was the sharp copper scent of disaster. Flashes popped from the balcony. The press had arrived. They were hungry for the story. The billionaire farmer who took down his own son. The wedding that turned into a raid. I ignored them. I buttoned my jacket and straightened my tie. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the deception was gone. The rot was cut out. I walked toward the main doors, my steps echoing on the marble. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked with the slow, steady gait of a man who has plowed fields from sunrise to sunset. I walked out of the castle and into the cool night air. The sirens were still flashing, painting the trees in chaotic rhythm, but above them, the stars were shining clear and cold. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean air. It didn't smell of fertilizer. It didn't smell of money. It smelled of peace. I walked down the long driveway, leaving the wreckage of my past behind me, ready to find whatever future was left for an old farmer who had finally harvested the truth. 1 month had passed since the sirens faded from the driveway of Belcourt Castle, but the silence they left behind still felt loud. The fallout had been swift and brutal. The headlines had run for weeks, detailing the fall of the Barrington Scion and the exposure of the Hawthorne fraud. I read them over my morning coffee with the detached interest of someone reading about a natural disaster in a foreign country. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was one that nature had demanded. Nicholas was currently being held without bail at Rikers Island. His lawyers had tried to argue for house arrest, but the judge, a known onsense woman who had seen the video of him plotting my institutionalization, denied it immediately. He was facing 15 years minimum, grand larceny, conspiracy to commit murder wire fraud. The charges were stacked so high they blocked out the sun. I hadn't visited him. I hadn't taken his calls. There was nothing left to say. Richard and Katerina Hawthorne had been evicted 48 hours after the wedding. They were now living in a weekly rental motel in New Jersey, the kind of place where the sheets were thin and the neighbors were loud. Their assets had been liquidated, their reputation incinerated. They were learning for the first time in their lives what it meant to actually be poor. Not just cash poor, but hope poor. I was back where I belonged. Kentucky. The morning air was thick with the scent of freshly turned earth. I stood by the fence watching the green expanse of the fields stretch out to the horizon. It was planting season, the most important time of the year. "Climb up there, son." I called out, my voice carrying over the rumble of the engine. "Don't be afraid of her. She is big, but she listens if you treat her right." Lucas hesitated, his hand resting on the massive tire of the new combine harvester. He was 24 years old with dirt under his fingernails that he didn't try to hide, and a work ethic that reminded me of myself 50 years ago. He was the son of my old foreman, a man who had worked this land with me until the day he died. When I had been sick last winter, when Nicholas was skiing in Aspen and couldn't be bothered to call, it was Lucas who had brought me soup, who had checked the fences, who had made sure the farm didn't fall apart. "Are you sure, Mr. Gus?" he asked, looking at me with wide, earnest eyes. "This machine costs $500,000. I don't want to break it." "It is just metal and rubber," Lucas, I said, walking over to him. "It can be fixed. Trust is harder to repair, and I trust you. Now, get up there." He climbed into the cab, his movements tentative at first, then growing more confident as he settled into the seat. I watched him check the gauges, adjust the mirrors. He treated the machine with respect. He treated the work with respect. I climbed up the ladder and stood on the platform beside the cab. "Turn the key," I said. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through the soles of my boots. It was the heartbeat of the farm. "Now, ease her forward," I instructed. "Feel the bite." Lucas engaged the gears, and the massive machine lurched forward, beginning its slow, steady march across the field. I watched his hands on the wheel, steady and sure. He wasn't thinking about stock prices or mergers. He was thinking about the soil. He was thinking about the crop. He was thinking about the future. We did a few laps together, the sun climbing higher in the sky, warming our backs. When we stopped near the barn, I motioned for him to kill the engine. The sudden silence was filled with the sound of crickets and the wind in the trees. "Lucas," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with a red handkerchief, "I have something for you." I reached into the pocket of my overalls and pulled out a folded document. It wasn't in a fancy envelope, it was just paper. "What is this?" he asked, taking at his hand stained with grease. "It is a contract," I said, "but not an employment contract. It is a partnership agreement." He looked at me confused, then looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the legal text, widening as he read. "Mr. Gus," he stammered, looking up at me. This says you are making me the CEO of Wainwright Agro, that you are giving me controlling interest." "That is right," I said, leaning against the tractor tire. "But why I am just a farmhand? I didn't go to Harvard. I don't know anything about boardrooms." "You know everything that matters," I said firmly. "You know that corn doesn't grow because of a spreadsheet. You know that a handshake means more than a contract. And you know that you don't turn your back on family, even if that family isn't blood." I looked out at the fields. My son went to Harvard. I continued, my voice quiet. He knew all the words: synergy, leverage, liquidity. But he didn't know the first thing about value. He thought value was something you took. You know that value is something you grow. Lucas looked down at the paper, tears forming in his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Just work. Keep the soil healthy. Keep the grain pure, and never let anyone tell you that you smell like fertilizer." I smiled at him, because fertilizer is the smell of money, and it is the smell of honesty. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't let you down, Mr. Gus, I promise. I know you won't, son." I left him there with the machine and the future of the company in his hands. I walked back to the farmhouse, my steps slow but light. The weight of the last few months, the betrayal, the anger, the vengeance, it had all lifted. I was empty, but it was a good emptiness, a clean slate. I walked up the steps to the porch and sat in my rocking chair. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, the cubes clinking softly against the glass. I looked out at the land, at the empire I had built and saved and now passed on. I wasn't alone. I had Lucas. I had the land. I had my dignity. I took a sip of the cold tea and closed my eyes, listening to the distant hum of the combine harvester starting up again. It was a good sound, a sound of continuity. Nicholas was sitting in a cell, probably thinking about where it all went wrong. Amelia was probably looking for her next mark. Richard was probably trying to con his way into a better motel room. But me, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I opened my eyes and looked at the fields one last time. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the turned earth toward me. "The stinky country boy is here," I whispered to the empty porch, a smile touching my lips. "And he isn't going anywhere." I took another sip of tea, breathing in the heavy, rich scent of the farm. Fertilizer? I thought, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of victory. That is the smell of money, and more importantly, it is the smell of peace. Gus Barrington Agritech taught us a brutal but necessary lesson. Blood does not make a family. Loyalty does. Nicholas had the Harvard degree and the expensive suits, but his soul was rotting with greed. While Lucas, though, he had dirt under his fingernails, possessed a heart of gold. And to you listening to this story, remember this: sometimes the hardest harvest in life is the truth. I spent years believing blood alone made a family. I was wrong. This was a painful family story, a warning carved out of family betrayal. And if there is one thing I learned, it is this: when pride blinds you, even your own home can become a place of family betrayal. I should have listened earlier. I should have watched more closely. I should have asked harder questions. God gave me signs, and more than once I ignored them. God sees what we hide from ourselves. God teaches us that loyalty matters more than titles or money. And sometimes God allows storms in our lives so the truth can finally grow. So, here's my advice: don't repeat my mistakes. Don't let silence replace honesty. Don't let money decide who deserves your trust. If someone shows you their heart is built on greed, believe them the first time. Because every family story has a moment where the truth is revealed, and sometimes that truth is family betrayal. This is only one family story, but maybe it holds a lesson worth keeping. The people who truly belong in your life are the ones who stand beside you when there is nothing to gain. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Gus went too far, or did Nicholas receive exactly what his actions deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you are watching from today. If this story moved you, consider sharing it and subscribing so you never miss another story like this. And truly thank you for staying with me until the very end. One last note: some upcoming stories may include fictionalized elements created for reflection and education. If that's not the kind of content you enjoy, you are always free to step away and choose something that suits you better.